Happy New Year. Today we're going to talk about 6 predictions that I have for 2023. These are all kind of tied to blockchain, the future of money, as well as digital assets. Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Molly Elmore. Today we're going to talk about my predictions for 2023. I will confess that I've chickened out twice of making this video simply because my predictions for 2022 did not work out as I had thought. When going back to a year ago, I really did not expect the world to be where it is right now. I did not expect the entire year to be this dark season for crypto. I did not expect a lot of the geopolitical conflicts that have really become bigger than I ever expected. I did not expect the energy crisis. So that said, I'm giving you my 6 predictions with the caveat that they may all be wrong. Some of them might be right, some of them might be wrong. So I'm not putting any money on these as wagers. I would say that I'm marginally confident in these predictions, but there is definitely no certainty in any of these. So there's my little disclaimer there. Okay, number 1, I do expect that the energy crisis will get worse in Europe than it was this year. That is sad and distressing. It seems like it was a series of decisions made over a fairly long period of time, kind of culminating with the conflict with Russia that has led to a serious shortage of energy in Europe. My understanding is that there actually are sufficient reserves for this winter. However, once this winter's done, next year will be a problem. And what does that mean? It means people will have difficulty heating their homes. Financially or economically, there will be serious problems for many businesses that need heat, electricity, energy to run, particularly in the manufacturing sector. There's a lot of German manufacturers who need tons of energy to make stuff. And if that is not available or is so cost prohibitive, the math doesn't work. That creates a lot of problems. And then it creates this cascade effect where, this big German plant, let's just say there's one in some town, it closes. Think of all the businesses that support that large manufacturing facility, the lunch places, the cleaning place, like whatever, all the other support businesses that feed into it. It kind of has this cascade effect of impact. So that is my first sad prediction. Many of my predictions are good, kind of good, sort of good. This one is not good. All right, next one is also not a good one. This is that I do think we are going to see a retail direct-to-consumer programmable CBDC launched in the UK and or Europe, likely in response to the impact of the energy problem. So if all these businesses have to close because they don't have energy, and that creates very high unemployment, could potentially disrupt bond markets, which disrupt pension funds. There's a lot of people who rely on a pension of some sort in the UK and Europe. And a lot of these things are like interconnected. And so if enough of them have difficulty, you hit this concept called a tipping point, where you kind of have gone beyond this point of return. And that could be the justification for the launch of a digital pound and digital euro. I believe both of those technologies are ready. There have been efforts in place working on them for a very long time. There's just little justification for it now. It's kind of going to be one of those things I think that's presented in response to a crisis. What's interesting is a couple of weeks ago, I was approached for a consulting project that had to do with the Australian retail CBDC, which I hadn't really thought much about. And it turned out that the Australian Central Bank had put out a request for proposal for projects that they can use to justify the implementation of a retail CBDC. So when I read through all of this, it was like, wow, the Australian Central Bank has a marketing problem. they can't figure out how to sell this idea onto citizens because they know there's going to be resistance. So they were looking for some clever and creative hooks on how to do that. So it did tell me that these central banks are aware that people are not going to be terribly excited. So one way to introduce something like this would be in response to a crisis. What crisis seems to fit the most globally? A energy problem in Europe. We also know that so a lot of these sort of dystopian agendas are being driven out of some crazy people who live in Europe, and they have influence over some of the European banking establishment. So that is now, here's going to be my good news. I don't think these retail CBDCs in terms of programmable money are going to work. There are so many challenges to getting every single person in a country or a continent to use this kind of digital wallet based money. You're going to have a lot of older people who don't really do technology very well. You're going to have a lot of very poor people who might not have internet or live in a place that there's internet or all those other types of things. And if they move to some kind of body device for it, like an implant thing, I think the backlash would be significant. Now, some people will comply, as we saw in 2020. But the thing about this programmable money idea is you really need everyone to use it, because if you have options, you're not going to use the programmable option very much. Now, I do know there's sort of a belief in monetary thing. I wrote a thread about it. I forgot what it's called, where the bad money drives out the good money. People will use all the bad money first, but that might happen, and people may use the retail CBDC just because if you give them free money, they'll kind of use it to buy stuff. But that doesn't necessarily mean a retail CBDC would be successful if people still have choices and are able to use, store value in something else. That's not the CBDC. I've seen quite a few like scary fear mongering type things, worrying about this major collapse of markets in Europe and how, we could have this situation where everything gets turned off for a couple of days and sort of this literal reset idea. That's still a possibility, and that could happen. I think that it might happen. Sorry, I'm kind of being a little evasive here, but I don't think that long term it will succeed. So there might be this sort of sucky period for a while where these retail CBDCs are being used. And I'm talking about the sort of dystopian version. There's many elements to CBDCs that are totally fine and actually quite innovative. Generally, they involve sending money from bank to bank. And even if you were to get a CBDC from a bank, but you have a bunch of banks you could get them from, and there wasn't this centrally managed smart contract that was connected to things like social credit scores, then I think we're good. It's just this sort of one dark dystopian scenario that I'm talking about right now. And I think we might see something like that be implemented in Europe in response to the energy crisis, but it won't last. There's just too many logistics, and I think there's too many people awake and aware of this agenda to get enough compliance that it succeeds. All right, prediction number 3. I predict that the SEC versus Ripple case ends. I know XRP people love to chat about this. There's certainly many opinions on it. None of us necessarily know for sure unless you're somehow an insider, which I am not. I think it's going to end, but I think it's not going to be all good or all bad. I think there's going to be elements to both. It's going to feel like a win, but there's going to be a cost. And my justification for that is I think you have these two sides have been invested in this battle for a very long time, that if they want to end it, both will have to concede in the negotiation. What does that mean? Like, what will be good? I think XRP will be not classified as a security. It will be given its permission to operate as intended to do. I think there's too many consequences in the crypto digital asset market. If it were classified as a security, it would mess up a whole lot of things for a whole lot of very influential people who would prefer not to have that happen. However, SEC likes to have their ego wins. They like to be able to brag about their success as enforcement operators and how powerful and good they are at nothing. So I think there'll probably be a significant fine, which doesn't really affect us all that much. Sucks for Ripple. But I also think there might be some conditions that we're not aware of. Maybe it's something like you have to be an accredited investor, or only certain types of exchanges are allowed to sell it. I think that we're going to get this situation with regulation where there might be this third classification, like a new designation for some of these assets, because they do function very differently than the money that we've had, and they're not the same as stocks. So to sort of try to fit this new world into these old buckets might be difficult. So one possibility is that there could be a new classification or a new designation, whatever you want to label it as, that carries some conditions that are fine for institutional investors, but not great for us. So I'm kind of preparing for that possibility. Not a great one, but I think they'll be good and they'll be bad. I do think, though, that long term it will help the industry and it will help XRP's value to have this end and to at least be able to move on from it. All right, prediction number 4. I predict that the Russian gold exchange launches and that this is the trigger that changes everything for gold. Basel III has been implemented in phases. I think there's a January element for the US markets, which essentially has to do with banks holding more gold in reserves, and they can't really do their paper gold thing anymore. The thing I have a problem with is the US banks have been doing all sorts of things they're not supposed to do with gold for a long time. Things that are illegal. They've been sued for them and they've gotten in trouble for them, and they still do them. They have this mechanism to suppress the price of gold, which I believe and many others believe is to protect the value of the dollar. That if gold becomes really, really highly valued, it's all relative to something else, and it'll just make the dollar look relatively weak, and it might not be the right time for that. However, one way to force this issue is for there to be an alternative place to buy and sell gold where the price is not suppressed. And if that were to happen in Russia, it would create this incredible arbitrage opportunity where people could go to New York or London, wherever you buy gold in these exchanges, or Chicago, maybe, I don't know, whatever, the Western gold exchanges, and you could buy them at $1,700 an ounce or whatever. And then you go to Russia and you sell it for $5,000 an ounce or whatever. The point is that the difference would be significant enough to justify doing that. What would happen if that were to be the case? All the gold would leave the West and it would go to Russia. And we're moving to this asset-backed currency world. You don't want to be the country with no gold. That would suck. So for Russia to create this mechanism that would allow all the gold to be drained out of the West would be a very serious problem. So I think the minute that gold exchange launches, the West can no longer suppress the price simply because of the problems the arbitrage opportunity would create. So while I think Basel III sounds like a nice idea, I know that the European banks who hold a lot of gold would love gold to be valued more because it gives them like more value in their reserves. But the US banks that have liked keeping gold low to protect the dollar, they're not always motivated by like what the laws are, bizarrely as that is. So I think that they would have to respond, though, to this arbitrage problem. All right, number 5. I think we're going to see a slow movement away from the dollar. So we've talked about this in this channel before. The demise of the petrodollar agreement, which was essentially an oil buying agreement made in the 1970s, where oil was sold globally only in dollars. And actually, consequently, pretty much anything bought in the global marketplace was done only in dollars. And then all these countries that sold stuff in dollars and had profit, they had to do something with that profit. So they would buy things like US bonds, treasuries, and they would take out loans in dollars. And so everything was just being done in dollars. And we've seen that this movement away from the petrodollar will change that. And now countries, especially those that are not the United States, will be able to buy and sell goods in other currencies of their choosing, which will sort of create this multipolar world, as it's sometimes referred to. I don't think that it's going to happen as like a dramatic overnight thing, simply because trade systems are used to doing things a certain way. And to all of a sudden have everybody in the world dramatically switch and stop using dollars like one day, I'm not sure that's realistic. There are also a tremendous amount of derivative products that are tied up in time-based contracts, meaning you hold something for quite a few years. Bonds, for example, you often buy a bond and you hold it for years. The idea that like they're all going to get sold and cashed in like one day, I think is unrealistic. Now, we may experience this tipping point idea that we talked about before, where you kind of enough move away that it creates a confidence problem in the dollar and that causes it to crash and there's sort of like panic selling. That could happen, but I still think it's going to happen a little. There's going to be some big chunks, but the idea that everyone in the world is going to stop using the dollar like on one day, I think is not that case, but it could happen very steadily throughout the year once we have some major players who were holding dollars and using dollars stop doing that. And then everybody else gets kind of nervous about it. So, but I think it's going to take some time for de-dollarization to happen. It could actually take years. All right, and my sixth and final one, I think we are going to see the launch of probably multiple gold-backed currencies. I know there's one going to be launching in Africa in January. We will see, I think, Russia's become a bigger player. China and some of the other BRICS nations will kind of on the global stage be more overt about their use of asset-backed currencies. Similar to the point number 5, I think to change everything, if you get into the details of like how many systems and like trade exchanges and all that kind of thing use dollars, the idea that, and like billing software and like the bank accounts, like for everything to switch all at once, I think is difficult. But once we see a couple of gold-backed currencies launch and they successfully launch and it creates this feeling of like, wait a minute, we're seeing this inflation problem with this fiat money, that my dollars are not worth what they were worth a couple of years ago. Why would I hold my money, my wealth in dollars when I now could hold it in this other currency that's gold-backed? I know there are some differing opinions about what it would take for this to sort of be felt globally. And like, you know, there have been gold-backed currencies like on the blockchain for a couple of years, like Pax Gold has one. They've had it for a while. So if these gold-backed currencies are so amazing, why aren't all these nations just buying up Pax Gold? And it's a good question. So will this African currency really change anything, or will it be just something for the gold industry to sort of yap about on Twitter? We'll have to see. But I think if we have enough of these currencies become asset-backed, again, we do this sort of tipping points, kind of game theory idea that if you force the hand of those reluctant by giving the rest of the world a much more attractive option to hold their wealth in gold or asset-backed currencies, then we will see over the course of the year this evolution away from fiat money to asset-backed currencies. And it's funny, the more I think about this asset-backed idea, the more questions I have about how like little nuances will work. One of the interesting concepts of the guy who wrote the Bitcoin standard, Safadine Amos, I think I don't know if I say his name right, I'm sorry. He likes to talk about how all these industries are affected by fiat money. Like he'll talk about fiat universities and fiat medical systems. And one thing, I was at the gym this morning and there was all these sort of sports things on. And I was wondering if when we move back to asset-backed currencies and things are no longer like overly valued and real money is used, I'm like, are we still going to have these NBA basketball players who get paid like millions of dollars a year? And these football, like you think about how many of these professional athletes command these incredibly high salaries. Is that a function of the fact that we have this sort of fiat money system where money can just be literally printed? And how will that change when all of a sudden now we have sound money? Like, are these sports teams still are they going to pay these guys millions of dollars in gold to play basketball? Like, I don't know. I think there's all these different, same thing with like Hollywood and musicians, all these sort of industries that are incredibly high paid. And maybe sometimes you could question whether that was deserved. Will that continue into this new asset-backed thing? I don't know. It's just interesting. I sometimes wonder about these things, all these different areas that it will impact. So we'll see. But I do think we will see some gold-backed currencies, and they might not just be simply gold. It could be a variety of different assets. But the idea is it's a return to sound money, and that there is some kind of physical entity that has perceived value that backs the money. So it's not just literally printed. Although the Federal Reserve, they issue these things called reserves, and then they let the banks print the money. But anyway, regardless, it will be actual money that has value backing it. So, all right, those are my 6 predictions for 2023. I might be wrong about all of them. Hopefully, I'll be right about most of them. Some of the ones that are dark, I actually would like to be wrong about one. I don't really want to see there being an energy crisis in Europe, but I think that is a strong possibility. If you have any predictions about 2023, feel free to share them in the comments. I'd love to check them out. And have a happy new year. I'll see you in the next one. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel so you can catch the next one.